Hey Bonbini everybody, welcome to part 2 of snorkeling in Grand Turk from my Carnival Vista cruise in May of 2018. If you missed part 1, check out the little card right there and it'll take you there, and you may want to watch that one first. It's just the beginning of this particular snorkel. Now there's a creel wrasse, a little bit better view of the creel wrasse. Wrasse, by the way, is W-R-A-S-S-E. That's the same group that parrotfish are a part of. So the creel wrasse is not a parrotfish, but it is in the wrasse family with the parrotfish. And those other little blue fish are those little blue chromis, those little damsels down there. Now, one of the fish that you're going to see a lot of in these videos, especially when I do snorkeling videos, are these fish called yellow-tailed snappers. And they are the ones, I'm sure you've noticed them if you've been watching part 1 and now part 2. They're kind of an elongated fish, sort of a whitish color, but then they have that yellow stripe, or I should say streak, kind of going down the middle of their body. We call lines on a fish going horizontally stripes, and if there's just one thick one, we call that a streak. And then their tail, their caudal fin, their tail fin, is also a bright yellow color. So those are yellow tail snappers. Makes sense, right? I mean, they don't snap. Well, they kind of make snapping sounds like that, but they don't. Never mind. Okay. Anyway, they're called yellow-tailed snappers. Now, I can tell you some interesting stuff about these fish. They're super common. I see them all over the place in the Caribbean and in Florida. We have them at the aquarium where I work, and they have a reputation of being some of the fish that there's one right there that get eaten by the sharks quite a bit. So I'm not saying that so that you are afraid that sharks are going to come eat you if you see yellow-tailed snappers, because they're just really plentiful. So your chances of seeing a shark are much slimmer than seeing a yellow-tailed snapper. I'm just saying that apparently they taste really good. So yeah. Alright, so I'm going to head down a few more times on this snorkel and see what I can see. Now, when you do free dive down like this, you want to go kind of slow. You don't want to exert and burn a lot of energy. That way you can conserve your oxygen a little bit better. Now, we're seeing a lot of fish kind of flash by. A lot of those are different types of parrotfish and snappers. Now that little fish right there is called a fairy basslet. That one looks a little blue to me, but usually they look more purple. Purple in the front, yellow in the back. I guess, is that like a fish mullet? There is a fish called a mullet, but no, I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about fish. Now, they can be tricky to identify because fish come in all different shapes and sizes and varieties, but the tricky bit is that the same species can have a lot of different color variants and even different stages. So like parrotfish, for example, usually have a juvenile phase, and then they have what's called their initial phase, which is sort of their non-dominant phase. And then there'll be one male, and if that male is gone, then one of the females will step it up and turn into a male. So they change their color. They look sometimes completely different in all three of those phases. So juvenile, sometimes even baby, juvenile, and then initial, and then terminal phase is that dominant phase there. So a lot of variety. There are a lot of them that look similar to one another. So it can be tricky. It's not like you just have to learn. If there's like 10 fish, it's not like you just have to learn what 10 fish look like. You have to learn like what 25 fish look like, but it's just those 10 fish. But you know, you've got to learn like 3 different phases or 4 different phases for some of them. So it can be a little tricky. Now there's some needlefish and things up at the surface. I couldn't see that one too close. There's a few different species you'll see that are long like that, swimming near the surface. One's called a ballyhoo. That's kind of a fun name, the ballyhoo. And then those look like they might be ballyhoo actually. I think that's what those were. But there's also needlefish, and there's a couple other different variety that you'll see hanging out up there. A lot of times you'll see those when you're up near the surface or on the surface, even looking into the water. One of the silverfish you'll see, because they hang out right up below that surface line. So a lot of times you can see them from outside the water. Now, this is a kind of like a little trench. And when I've gone diving here and on other walls, usually you can kind of swim down into these if there's enough room. Now this is what I'm talking about. That fish that just swam below us is a queen parrotfish. It's the initial phase. And then this one right here, that is the terminal phase or male of the queen parrotfish right there. So that's the same species of fish. They just look a lot different. If you saw some fish down there with yellowtails, not the streak going down, those were a type of fish called a schoolmaster. So you see those schooling a lot near the bottom, whereas the more typically. I mean, you could see them deeper, but I usually see them kind of in that more open water. They're swimming up near the surface. That's probably what those were, swimming by those people over there. I'm sure they were feeding them. The other fish that you see a lot of up at the surface, but only when they're being fed, are sergeant majors. So if you see a white fish with black bars, that's lines going up and down. Think of like bars on a window or a jail cell or something. And then a little bit of yellow at the top. And they're a smaller, shorter fish. Those are your sergeant majors. So they are named because they kind of look like sergeant stripes, although we call our sergeant bars. Do they call them bars there? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so that's just some of the common fish. We're seeing a lot of fairly common fish, although I don't normally see too many of the queen parrotfish. So that was kind of neat to see. Now, you see that fish swimming down there? I think we're going to get a better view of it here pretty soon. That is a barracuda. So that's a fish you'll see occasionally visit the reef. A good example of a fish that doesn't hang out on the reef all the time, but will pass into the reef looking for that little snack. Now, at night, a lot of times they'll also find a little trench like that one right down there, and they'll just kind of become sort of dormant. Just they'll hover basically, and that's their off time. That's how they sleep. Fish do sleep, sort of. They kind of go into a state where they're not very active. It's not the same as us sleeping, but they do have active and inactive periods of time. So yeah, you could wake a fish up, sort of. Now, one of the cool things about going to any coral reef is to see the biomass. I mentioned biodiversity. Biodiversity is the amount of different types of animals. Biomass is the amount of those animals. There's our barracuda friend. Now, these guys have a really bad reputation that they do not deserve. Barracuda are not dangerous fish. You do not want to really feed them by hand. That can end poorly for everybody involved, but that's not usually an option. There's a sergeant major swimming down there at the bottom. They're pretty shy. They're kind of curious though, so they'll usually let you get kind of close, but if you get too close to them, they're probably going to dart off and stay away from you. They keep their distance, and they know you are there. I have swam around barracuda and sort of keeping my distance, sort of followed them around, and you know they're always keeping that certain amount of space away from you. But yeah, look at all the biomass. You see all those fish out there in the background. I mean, there's a lot of fish that are down here. So pretty cool experience. Any kind of coral reef system, if you have an opportunity to snorkel or scuba dive, or even if it's shallow enough and you're not standing on the coral, just stand in the water with your mask on, checking it out, maybe even a glass bottom boat. There's just so much to see in these types of areas. Now here I'm just kind of catching another breath, probably chatting with Charlie, talking about that shark. We were both super excited about seeing that shark. Charlie was like, "This is my first shark in the wild." And then I reminded him that the year before we actually went swimming with whale sharks. So I don't know how you forget a little shark like that, Charlie, but if he watches this, I just got to give him a little trouble. But no, it was cool. It's neat to see any kind of shark. To me in the wild, it's always a cool thing to see. Sharks, of course, like coral reefs, most of those species out there, which there are over 400 different species of shark out there, a lot of them are having some struggles in our modern world of commercial fishing and pollution and climate change and all the different things that are really abruptly changing their habitat. Sharks are one of the apex predators, or at the top of the food pyramid, but sometimes those guys can be the most vulnerable to these sort of rapid changes. Now, I saw a lot of Creole wrasse on this trip, not just in Grand Turk, but in Aruba and Curacao, as you'll see those videos come out down the road here. And that's exciting to me. I think the Creole wrasse is one of the prettiest fish that I see on a fairly regular basis. They're really a beautiful purple, and they also have an initial phase and a terminal phase. So not all Creole wrasse look the same, but they all look impressive. They're all really pretty fish. It's kind of cool to swim on this wall though and just take in this expanse. I mean, just the thought that if you go kind of over that edge, it's just going to drop off down to 7,000 feet underwater. I mean, that's crazy. Now, if you're a scuba diver, then you can go down to, 70, 80 feet is normally about the limit. If you're just a regular scuba diver, a hobbyist scuba diver, maybe you'll go to 100 feet or so, but after that, you're kind of pushing it a little bit. Now, if you're like a military diver, they go deeper, they do different things. If you're a commercial diver, they will typically go quite a bit deeper, and they have to start doing things like using mixed gases and go through a lot of decompression. There's a lot of things when you start getting below that depth point, that a lot of things you have to do, a lot of things that change. There's our barracuda friend. Almost didn't see him there hanging out. Beautiful fish. Now, this is a great barracuda, and that's not a judgment on other barracuda, by the way. I think all barracuda are great in their own right, but that particular species called a great barracuda, and most of them I see are about the size of that one, which I would guesstimate was somewhere around 2 to 3 feet long. They can, however, get a little bit bigger than that. You just don't see them that big that often, but they do occasionally get pretty big. We have some at the aquarium that are probably pushing the 4 or 5 foot range, so it can be a fairly large sized fish. Okay, up at the surface again, there's Charlie demonstrating some good snorkeling posture there, horizontal in the water. Charlie, good job, my friend. And look, I think most of those are probably Creole wrasse. I don't know why there were so many Creole wrasse on this trip, but there were a few. To say the least, there were a few. Just got to take it all in and catch my breath. The thing about holding my breath is that this was our first place we went to, so I wish I could go out and snorkel every day, but I don't get to do it as often as I'd like, and so you kind of got to warm up to it. You got to kind of stretch the lungs out and get comfortable, and it usually takes me a few dives down. There's that porcupine fish. A few dives down to really adjust and get comfortable and maximize my breath holding, and then if I do it repeatedly over a few days, then I can really get to where I can stay underwater for an extended period of time. Now, there are free divers. I say that I free dive, but I'm not really like a professional free diver. There are some people out there that can hold their breath for quite a few minutes. Those little yellowfish are different types of juvenile wrasse, maybe bluehead wrasse or yellowhead wrasse. Couldn't tell from here. But yeah, if you are going to be a free diver in the truest sense of it, and you're holding your breath for 3-4 minutes or more, there's a lot of safety restrictions that go along with that, and I would encourage you to try and find a class somewhere that you can take. There are certifications. Now, the thing is, you're not required to be certified to free dive because there's no way to regulate that, but for your own personal safety, you want to learn some techniques that'll be safe for you to swim underwater. One of the things that I did throughout most of my life, because I was told to do this when I was 15, was to hyperventilate before I would go underwater. And what that does is it kind of tricks your brain into thinking that you don't need oxygen. Now, the reality is your brain is going to tell you that you need oxygen way before you actually do. So part of holding your breath is having this argument with your brain that you really don't need it. But the problem is, if you trick it a little too well, then you could end up passing out. And obviously, passing out underwater, in the water, is extremely dangerous. So make sure that you are following safety rules, and don't go out and hyperventilate a bunch of times and then swim underwater, because it is not safe to do. I can't really see that fish too well, but I think that might have been a fish called a blue runner that just swam by. So that's another fish that you'll see just swimming in sort of this open water area. They don't usually go too close to the bottom for extended periods of time. They're usually kind of hanging out more in that mid-water range or closer to the surface. Now I think we were getting close to the end of this snorkel, and I wanted to kind of really get down and deep. I'd been swimming a little bit, so I'd stretched the lungs out, and I wanted to see how far and how long I could stay down here. So, you know, I went down, tried to check it out. That's my watch. I just got a new one that has a depth gauge, but as you can see, I didn't do a very good job of capturing that on camera. I wanted to see how deep I was. Oh, did you see that fish right there? That fish hanging out under the rock? That was a type of squirrel fish. That's a fish you'll see if you're down here around the rocks and stuff. They like to hide. They're more nocturnal, but of course, you know, if you look under little crevices and in caves and stuff like that, a lot of times you will actually see them. They're out. There are fish called soldier fish and squirrel fish. There's different types. They're all very similar looking. There's also some smaller versions called cardinal fish, but all similar, kind of related to one another, some very closely related. And neat fish. When you see them, you can go, squirrel! I mean, that's what I do. I don't know. You don't have to do that. Back over at Charlie, you see that little valve he's got. It's on his left shoulder. So that is a little valve that you can manually inflate your snorkel vest. Put a little air in there if you want to. And then basically you kind of pull down on it and you blow into that. And that'll allow you to put air in your snorkel vest. And then to let that air out, you're going to hold that down and then just kind of hold that valve so it's pointing up, and you're going to squeeze your snorkel vest to try and get that that air out of your vest. The problem is it's hard to get all the air out, so you want to kind of consider that. If you are going to dive down, you know, you may want to try not to put any air in there if you think you're going to be diving down, because it might be hard to get that air back up out of there. Now I think this is right at the end of the snorkel. Everybody is starting to head back to the boat. It's the saddest time of the snorkel. There goes Charlie, I think, back to the boat. And I like to be the first one in the water and the last one out of the water. That's always my goal, you know. See if I can get one more little deep dive. There's a yellowtail snapper there. I think I was trying to check the time. Do I have to go back to the boat? I don't want to go back. Don't make me go back already. See if I can catch that depth as well. There's a little blue chromis hanging out there. A bunch of them. Yeah, you can see the herd has moved on. They're all over at the boat. So we're going to head back over to the boat as well. But again, this is a case where if you're comfortable out there, you know, once they call everybody in, realize everybody's going to make a mass exodus for that ladder. If there's still a lot of people in the water, sometimes a lot of them get out of the water beforehand, but you know, hold off for a minute and just let them go. And when they get down to just a few people over there, you know, then kind of make your way over. Now, you don't want to be too far, because then the guys in the boat get nervous and they're like, hey, did you hear us? Come over here. Got to get out of the water now. Let's hang out. You never know what you're going to see when everybody gets out of the water. Sometimes things that were staying away come around. And it's not unusual to see something really, really cool out there. But listen, this is going to wrap up this Grand Turk snorkeling adventure. I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, make sure to hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that bell so you get notified every time a new video comes out. Have a fantastic day.